Hey everyone, before we start this episode, I wanted to talk to you about the situation in Maui. The destruction on Maui is considered the worst wildfire in modern U.S. history, with the death toll increasing hourly and over $5 billion in damage. The Maui fires have the attention of the international news cycle. However, this will continue to impact the people of Maui for years longer than one news cycle. On top of the devastation and displacement, corporate interests have already begun trying to grab their scorched land to develop and profit off of the tragedy. Financially supported communities are better positioned to refuse land grab offers, so the more money we give the people of Maui in this crucial time, the better they can provide relief, rebuild, and ensure their land stays theirs for the long haul. The fastest way to spread the word right now is to make videos, communicate what you can in any way you can, whether it be on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and Twitter, encouraging people to donate. So the best place to donate is a donation fund or run by Aina Mamona, a local grassroots nonprofit organization run by Native Hawaiians. The donations made here will go directly to verified Maui families impacted by the wildfires. So I'm going to put the link in the show notes. If you can donate, if you have the ability to do so, and you want to help the people directly, you can go and donate to the link below for Aina Mamona. Like I said before, it's a local grassroots nonprofit organization run by Native Hawaiians. Thank you for your support in advance. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be putting this clip in all of my episodes for the next few weeks, and it's just something that we need to do to help people. We've seen the wrath of climate change, and now it's time to help the people that are affected by the consequences. Thank you so much for your support. Let's start the show. If you want a career in marine science and conservation, this is the episode for you. I have a guest on today, Anupa Asokan, who is the senior advocate for the Oceans Division of the Nature Program for the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. And she's here to talk about her career path that she's taken. And what's really interesting about this career path is she's in every job, she's almost had like a different position with certain similarities in certain areas, but they've been very different in most when you look at the job titles and when you look at the types of organizations that she's worked for and government departments that she's worked for. And it's interesting because a lot of the times when people say, hey, follow a specific career path, this is the way you want to go, you got to keep, the riches are in the niches kind of thing, and your career path should follow a specific type if you want to get into this area when you're like, the age 35. I've said it, other people said it. Anupa's on this podcast and shows a very different light and shows how she did it and kind of reflects on how she did it. Plus, we get to talk a lot about marine protected areas in this episode, which I'm super, super excited. So as I'm so excited, why don't we get started with the show? Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today's episode, we are looking at someone who has taken action in her career, but also in her hobbies as, a fisher, as a surfer who loves to just play in the water, and want to live by a coastal city or a coast anywhere, really. Anupa has done that, and she has done it very, very well by maintaining a job in marine conservation, something that is absolutely important. And she's working as an ocean advocate or senior oceans advocate, or I guess a senior advocate, in the Oceans Division of the Nature Program for the Natural Resources Defense Council, a very highly touted organization. She collaborates with a lot of people. She gets out and she speaks to different stakeholders, so fishers, surfers, all people who use, the ocean and in some kind of way. And it's really interesting to follow her career path. And of course, something that I'm really excited about is to be able to discuss marine protected areas. And we go in on looking at the marine protected area network within California. and how that's going, and where we need to go with that, with the 30 by 30. So that's protect 30% of ocean waters and terrestrial areas in each country by 2030. And so we talk a lot about that and the different avenues in which they are trying to increase that percentage from 16% to 30% by 2030. Not an easy way, as you're going to discover in this podcast, but something that's really, really interesting. So before we get to the interview, I just want to ask you again, do you want a career in marine science and conservation? If you do, you're going to want to sign up to my private podcast called Build Your Career in Marine Science and Conservation. It's a very simple title, and it tells you exactly what you want to do. It goes over tips and tricks on how to, and strategies on how to apply for the job, how to plan your career, what to look for, what scenarios to look for, what programs to look for, which we talk in this episode a lot about. A very different graduate program that is getting more and more popular as the day goes by. And Anupa talks about her experience within that. And it's just everything that is encompassing this career you are going to want to follow, you're going to want to listen to, but also listen to this private podcast that I have, this program. It's $5 a month. You get a weekly podcast published. There's over 25 episodes already, so you can dive into it. And it's just going to be amazing. There's lots of other things that was going to come out through this program, and I'm really excited for you to be a part of it. So if you want to be a part of it, you can sign up today and get access to 25 plus episodes. All you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/career. That's speakupforblue.com, all one word, /career. So speakupforblue.com/career. Let's get into the interview with Anupa Asokan. It's a great interview. You're going to love it, and enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Anupa, welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about one of my favorite topics, marine protected areas?
I'm so ready. I think about marine protected areas all day, every day. So I'm excited to talk about them.
I love that. Hey, I am the same way. Marine protected areas is a fun topic to talk about. But what we also want to do, this is the second time you're on. Last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about the Upwell Conference. We had a couple of episodes on that, and we talked. It was more of a before the Upwell Conference and what you were anticipating, and talking about some of the panels. And you were one of the, panelists on one of the panels of Ocean Joy, I believe, is what they called it, right? And talking about how much you love the ocean, your background in fisheries and surfing and just being around the ocean. And we're going to talk about where that love came from and where that relationship came from in this episode. And we're going to get to talk about your job and talking about marine protected areas. So there's a lot of exciting things to tackle today. But before we get into all that, why don't you just remind the people of who you are and what you do?
My name is Anupa, and I am an ocean advocate. I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. And my focus area right now is on marine protected areas, and I do a little bit of fisheries. I'm based in California, so I'm working on our marine protected area network here. And when I'm not saving the ocean, I'm in the ocean. As much as I can get out there and play in the water, I try and do that.
I love it.
So
I love it. And it's so great to be around a coastline. Although it's a cold coastline, if I'm not mistaken, where you are right now. But where did that relationship start, and where did that relationship come from with the ocean, where you love to be around the ocean?
So I grew up in Florida, and I spent a lot of time on the Gulf Coast of Florida, even though I grew up in kind of the middle, but it's all pretty close to the coast once you get down into the peninsula. My dad really loves to fish, still does.
Nice.
And in retirement, he's pretty much out on the Gulf fishing as much as he can. So that was my first connection to the ocean. I never really thought about it as anything more than, this is what I do with my dad on the weekends when I'm not studying or doing whatever I need to do to get through school. And then when I got to college, I came to UCLA. I moved to Southern California, wanting to go to film school. And I took an oceanography class as my science course, like my general intro, get a general credit out of the way. It's like, oh, cool, oceanography.
That's an interesting course to take, right off the bat. Oceanography. You're going to learn everything about the ocean, the physics, the chemistry, the everything, right?
Yeah.
The biology.
And it sort of stuck with me. And, I decided I didn't want to do film school. It wasn't for me. And I was toying around with, different, I guess the beauty of going to a big school like UCLA is you can explore and try out different courses, see what works for you, see what resonates with you. And I kept going back to that oceanography course I had taken my very first quarter, and I went for it.
Nice.
And yeah, started interning at a little aquarium down at the end of the Santa Monica Pier, run by a local nonprofit called Heal the Bay.
Right.
And
Heal the Bay is very
it.
popular. Not just it might be small in sort of number of staff, but it does a lot of work. And I know, like, I'm from Canada and I've heard of Heal the Bay. It's quite the organization, right?
Yeah, and has sort of produced some legends in the ocean conservation community here in California. So
no doubt, yeah. So when you went to UCLA, did you end up graduating with a degree in oceanography or marine biology or marine science?
Yeah, the degree was actually atmospheric, oceanic, and environmental sciences. So a bit of a mouthful, but a little bit of that kind of weather and ocean nexus, which we know as climate.
Yeah.
And was very helpful. I don't know, we'll probably get into some of my career path and journey, but I spent some time at NOAA and actually worked for OAR, which is Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, which is one of the main line offices or components of what makes NOAA.
Right. And what kind of work did you do there?
I actually worked in communications. So a little bit of coaching for scientists to help them better explain their research to the public and to lawmakers, writing reports that went up to the White House, writing reports for the public. I also got to answer fun emails from the public with crazy ideas of how we could do better at giving weather reports and saving the ocean and whatnot. So that was fun.
There's something about people in saying that they can tell the weather better than weather people can, right? Like better than scientists. Like, I can predict the weather. I know when the weather's going to be. I always hear that, like even from friends or anything like that. It's like the people who are doing the Weather Channel or the people who are working behind the scenes know nothing about radar and this and that. I know better. There's something about that. There's a fascination with telling the weather. I feel like everybody thinks they can tell the weather differently, right? Instead of the scientists who are behind it, who know everything about the weather.
The number of emails that we would get, and I'm sure they still do, about nuking hurricanes. Like, that's how you get rid of them, is to bomb them. It's like, okay, well, then we just have a radioactive hurricane.
Cool. Did that start after Trump said that?
No.
Like, but didn't he come out? No,
well, he did, but it was before. There's even an FAQ page from one of the NOAA labs that like addresses it and kind of goes through the scientific reasoning for why we can't do that.
That is amazing. I have to look that up. That might have to be a piece of content on there. That's awesome. And I'm sure you probably got a lot of how to handle climate change type of emails as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, none stand out at the moment, but I do remember plenty about that topic.
Yeah. There's one thing that's guaranteed when I post anything about climate change. There's somebody that's going to say that there's no climate change. It's just natural. And it's like, I could predict it. Like, I could predict the timing. I'm like, the first comment's going to be anti-climate change. There's some, like, I don't know if it's like little bots that are coming out and saying it or actual people, but it's like they wait for that hashtag and they're just like, nope, this is not real. One guy told me, it's like, there's a guy on, he goes, you should watch this video on YouTube from this guy who's saying it's all miscommunication or manipulation from the scientist world. I'm like, 97% of scientists like have published on this, and you're going to believe a guy in a YouTube video.
Yeah.
I mean, coming from a guy who does YouTube videos, but like, come on.
We're all living it now, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
In short lifetimes, we've seen so many changes to our planet and the environment. It's hard to deny. So
yeah, especially these days, it seems like every time we turn the corner, there's something going on. It is heavy stuff, heavy stuff. People are being affected everywhere. Yeah, it's not fun. So you worked at OAR for how long did you do that job?
I was there for 3 years in Washington, D.C. And I guess there are a couple steps that I went through before I got there. I think one
Okay.
that's really significant, though, is after college, I taught marine science out on Catalina Island, which is an
Okay.
island off the coast of Los Angeles.
Okay.
And that was, I think, in any communications job, having that time just one-on-one, well, not one-on-one, but direct interaction with kids and,
Yeah.
hands-on learning about the environment, learning about the things that we see off the coast here, being able to give them that experience. Oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
it was the first time a kid had gotten on a boat, much less put on a wetsuit and gotten in the ocean to see things
Wow.
underwater.
Yeah.
So I think, that was really, really defining for me, just in, making connections to other people that have that sense of adventure and wanting to be outside, and
Yeah.
also learning how to talk about the things that I love to do and talk about the science and the ocean and what we see out there, how we talk about the changes.
Yeah. Well, and I
And
think it's also interesting to hear the questions that some of these kids have too, because there's probably questions that you probably haven't even heard. Some would be realistic questions, like, or where you would give like a realistic answer, or it's like, no, that can't, that's not a thing, or, but others, like, you're probably like, wow, that was a really good question. I never would have approached it that way, right?
yeah, just having that understanding of different ways people think and kind of process
Mm-hmm.
information really helps you be a clearer communicator, as you kind of build that experience and see the
For
different
sure.
ways and the different questions that kids ask, right? Like speaking
Mm-hmm.
to a policymaker is not that much different than explaining these concepts to a fourth grader, believe it or
It's
not.
true.
So the
It's
simpler
true.
you can do it, the better.
That's
So that
cool.
was really helpful to my time at
Yep.
NOAA and other jobs that I've had along the way. And a big part of being an advocate now, right, for the ocean is being able to communicate effectively, explain these
Mm-hmm.
concepts, why we need ocean protections, why we need to
Yeah.
create marine protected areas. Those
Yep.
communication skills have definitely served me well.
Well, especially when you're writing reports and policy briefs to politicians, and making sure that they have a full understanding quickly, like they can get that full understanding quickly if they're going into meetings or going into, Congress or Senate, wherever they're going to speak on these issues, and make it look like they know about these issues, right? Like, it's got to
Right.
be,
Yeah.
you got to be concise, and when you're able to make those reports and briefs, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Interesting. So it's interesting. So from that, was that like more of an education position, the one in the Channel Islands or Catalina Islands? Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess my title was officially marine science instructor.
Okay.
We
Okay.
would get school groups out on field trips. So they'd come for three
Gotcha.
days or 5 days, and I'd have a group of around 15 kids to teach over the
That's
course of the
cool.
week. We'd go
Yeah.
snorkeling. We had labs, a small like aquarium facility that I helped
Hmm.
maintain with my coworkers, hiking, kayaking, just really exploring
That sounds
the
like a
island.
blast. Like coming out of college, and being able to be like, look, I've
Definitely.
got a lot of field work. I get to work with kids. It's a lot of fun. Go over sort of like the basic marine biology principles, and things like that. Show them animals and habitats and stuff. That sounds like a bit of a dream coming out of college, right?
It was. I went to the island thinking I was going to do like a 3 month stint, just a season, and I was there for over 3 years. So,
I love that. You're like, yeah, I'm just gonna be there for a little bit. No, no, I'm gonna stay.
yeah,
That's great. I love that. And so, where did you go after that? After those 3 years?
I went to graduate school in Rhode Island. It was the farthest north I've ever
Oh,
been. I saw snow on a
okay.
beach. It was wild. And I studied oceanography. So they have this
Yeah.
cool program called a Blue MBA. So it's a master's in oceanography with an MBA.
Oh,
In my
cool.
mind at the time, I was like, if this ocean thing doesn't work out, a business degree isn't going to hurt.
True.
But it was also one of those things like having the teaching background and being able to communicate well, just having a general understanding of how organizations are run and marketing, finance, basic like contract law
Yeah.
obviously helps in anything that you do. So,
And it's such a different way to prepare you and it does prepare you for conservation, right? Instead of just pure science. And I think a lot of people, when they think of going to grad school, they get either directed or they just have this thought process where it's going to be a research thesis and it's all going to be pure research. And then maybe you pick up some other things through volunteering or internships as you go through that maybe more of the like marine affairs or conservation law or ocean law type of things. But this Blue MBA sounds like it prepares you for, the work that you're doing now quite well, I assume, right?
Yeah. And again, just in the way that, kids ask questions in different ways and process things differently, right? Like people who are lawyers are going to think about things differently versus marketing professionals. So having that kind of interdisciplinary background also, I think, makes you a stronger communicator. Just you're seeing different perspectives and how people might approach or respond to the information you're giving them about any given topic.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
it was really
awesome.
great to be able to interact with those different kind of departments around the university.
Oh yeah. Is that like a 2-year or 3-year degree?
Oof, it was a year and a half.
Oh, so they're throwing everything at you.
Rough. Yeah, but they've since modified the program a little bit. So they generously give you 2 years
Okay.
for the 2 degrees. So
Yeah. Okay. Right on. That's pretty cool. I mean, I think that's obviously paid off for you in terms of what you're able to pick up. And like, does it have like, do you do internships at all through this program, or do you get connections with maybe alumni that have gone through before?
Yeah. I think they're building out their kind of alumni program a little bit more.
I guess because it's probably pretty new. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they've reached out to me a few times for conversations and, ways to look at the career path that I've taken and how they might build out the program. So, but yes, I think that there are opportunities and more to come.
I think we're seeing more and more of this kind of type of degree, which I think, helps build people up for these type the jobs at NRDC and things like that, where you're dealing more. It's a bit of policy, it's a bit of advocacy, it's a lot of, science is involved, being able to interpret communications and everything like that. I think it's really good. So when you after you were, or as you were doing that program, what did your mindset change, throughout that policy or throughout that program, where you were like, okay, I want to go in a different direction other than education?
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, actually, to be perfectly honest. There were,
That's awesome.
just I guess I was drawn to the experiences and the courses that were of interest to me. Because I had spent so much in-depth time out on Catalina teaching marine biology. I made a case, I remember, to waive the biological oceanography course. And I tested out of it. I had a really long conversation with the professor and they agreed. And so I took a couple classes through the marine affairs program at the University of Rhode Island. So I supplemented my degree a little bit in that way. And then I was able to take another course. I wanted to take scientific diving because I love to be in the ocean. It's like, I've never dove in Rhode Island. I want to take the scientific diving course. And weaseled that into my degree program as well. So charted my own path a little bit, but it was more just, taking advantage and making a case for the things that I thought were interesting and that I could, find a way to pursue and learn.
Yeah. I know that scientific diving program is no joke in terms of what you learn. You learn quite a bit, but it's also fun because you're in the water when you learn it, right?
Yes. Well, and what's funny, I grew up in Florida, so there are 2 different kinds of fins that you can wear. One, you just slide your foot in like a shoe, more like a sandal, right? And your toes are exposed. Right. And the other one, you wear booties for a little insulation, and then you slide the fin over your foot. I am diehard committed to my foot fins. I will deal with cold feet.
Even in Rhode Island.
Even in California, which has pretty cold water.
That's true.
But it was Rhode Island where I remember getting into the ocean and then I got out and it was snowing. I was like, this was a bad idea. But I did it.
Good for you. They're probably like, man, Anupa's tough. She goes the open-toed.
Not that tough, but...
That's
I
awesome.
got acclimated to cold water and then didn't find a real job, so to speak, and ended up going back to teaching, but in the Florida Keys. So then I was
So
back
you're
in
like,
my
yeah,
warm water. So I
yeah,
felt
you're
like I
back in your
earned it.
element. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. So you had trouble, like, did you have trouble finding something, or was it something where because a lot of people graduate, whether it be from undergraduate work or a graduate degree, and they have, it's not easy to get a job, in any kind, no matter if you're pivoting and switching, sort of focuses, or you are trying to get something out of school. It can be challenging. Um, what were you looking for at the time that that you couldn't get, or was it just like, did you have a focus of what you wanted at that time?
Yeah, I think it was one of those situations where you finish grad school and you apply to anything that sounds remotely
Yeah.
interesting that you're qualified for, so you can get a foot in the door somewhere. And I think at that time, right, there weren't a lot of jobs at the
Hmm.
moment when I graduated. And yeah, an
Yeah.
opportunity came up. They needed some support at this program down in the Keys for a season. It's like, you know what? I'll do it. And after
Absolutely.
being
I
in a
mean,
library for a year and a half, getting
yeah,
back out
and
in
in
the
cold
water every
water.
day.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
There's
Seemed
something.
really appealing.
There's For sure, there's something about being a marine biologist, or being in marine conservation, where if somebody comes up and offers you a job and they're going to pay you for it, and you can be in the field for most of the time, there's that appeal. You're just like, hey, you know what, I think I can handle this. For me, as long as I can come back every day, to have a life on land as well, where I'm not out at sea, because I used to be at sea, like, for 7 weeks at a time, and you're just like, no, no, if I could just come back every day to, like, be with my family or be with whoever and have a life, that's the life. That's the marine biology life, if you go out in the field and do that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's really hard to say no when, someone gives you an opportunity to be on the water. I love the
Oh
work that
yeah.
I do now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have a little bit, the grass is always greener, right?
Oh, for
It's
sure.
that
For sure. I
moment.
mean,
The
yeah,
water's
for
always
sure.
bluer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, like, let's talk about how did you end up working at NRDC? Did you go right from the Keys to this opportunity?
No, I was up in Washington, D.C. I got a
Oh, that's
job
right. At the NOAA. Okay.
I was with a nonprofit first, and then I made the jump to NOAA, which I really loved. But ultimately, I just wanted to be back on the coast. DC is the farthest I've lived from the ocean.
Right. Right.
And as the crow flies, the ocean isn't that far, but it
Hmm.
felt very far to me. Just
Well, with
being
traffic
in,
and everything.
oh,
Yeah.
yes, yes, all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I started looking for opportunities that were in coastal cities again. And in my mind, I thought I would go back down to the South. My family's still in Florida.
Of
And
course.
an opportunity came up in Los Angeles with a nonprofit called X Prize
Okay.
Foundation, with
Yep.
their ocean
Yep.
initiative. And it seemed
Okay.
like such a good mesh of the science degree plus the business degree in helping these small companies,
Gotcha.
find a way to get their solutions to some of our biggest ocean problems out there. So I spent some
Yeah.
time with X Prize Foundation.
And plus, with Los Angeles, you're pretty much along the coastline, wherever you live, or you can find places to live where you're along the coastline, where it
Yeah.
doesn't take long to get there, which is kind of nice as well. So that's cool. So you're able to use that blue NBA to use that in your job, which is kind of exciting. X Prize is a great organization as well. It's helped fund a lot of different sort of startups and different initiatives and so forth. And so it's great there. So I mean, it's kind of interesting up to this point. You've worked in a lot of different careers. Like, you pivoted quite a bit, in terms of what you were following. A lot of people, or some people, say that it's difficult to do that and transfer to those jobs. Where do you think, or why do you think you succeeded in being able to do that? It seems like every job you were doing something a little bit different. Why do you think you were successful in attaining those jobs at those times?
When young folks, like early career folks, reach out to me for job advice, I think the biggest reflection that I've had is, if you get your perfect job out of college, congratulations, that's amazing. I'm so excited for you. But
Right.
I think you also learn, you get a little bit closer to what's right for you, right? You learn what you like and what you don't like about an
Hmm.
organization, about a job, about your day to day. And I think each of these steps has gotten me a little bit closer to finding a place like NRDC where I really feel,
Mm.
like supported by my coworkers. I get to work on really interesting topics. I'm working with brilliant people, and I'm getting to like fight for the issues and the things that I believe in. The through line for all of it has been the ocean, right? Like that's something that
Right.
I realized is important to me and that I really love. And I've been
Hmm.
able to luckily, have that connection in some way, shape, or form throughout my career. But yeah, and again, also, I think that like education and communications piece has also been something that's been relevant to each of these
Hmm.
positions. And I've been able to kind of make a case for that as a really strong skill set that could help me succeed in all of these different positions that I've had over the years.
I mean, it's just been so great where you've been able to find positions kind of across, even with your MBA across like the US and being able to, work on different coastlines and in different areas. Like DC is, a little bit of a headquarters for a lot of the conservation that goes on, based in the US and even internationally. And then you're like, you know what, I need to live by a coastline again. And let's get back to that. And you're able to find it in Los Angeles, which obviously you were familiar because you went to UCLA. So that was kind of nice coming home. You probably had some friends there because that's important too. Where you live is you want to have some sort of, um, social life or, or even family, like if you went back to Florida and so forth. So that's always important as well, which I love. And now you're at a position where you're at NRDC. I assume that's the position you found after X Prize. Is that correct?
Yeah, I left X Prize during the pandemic. I was
Okay.
furloughed to be
Oh,
candid.
yeah.
I think a lot of people experienced, some
Oh, yeah.
transition during the pandemic, which is, reasonable. And it was kind of the way of the world at the time.
Yeah.
So I did some contract work. I supported this really cool company called Boreo for a little bit,
Okay.
and worked at the World Surf League, supporting their 30 by
Right.
30 Marine Protected Area campaign. And they were doing that in partnership with NRDC, actually. So that's how I got connected to
Okay.
NRDC and got to meet the team there. And then eventually
The
a
networking
position
worked
opened
well.
up, and I was able to apply and was selected for it, which was a dream come
That's
true.
awesome.
So.
It's always nice too when the place you work for now has worked with you before and
Mhm.
knows sort of how you work and the value that you can bring to that team. And I think that's important for employers too, to be like, oh yeah, well, we know Anupa, recognize the name as it comes across the resume pile, and then being like, oh yeah, okay, no, we've worked with her before on this project and we collaborated with her. And so I think that really helps. What
Well, and
attracted
the
you?
other way
Oh, sorry, go
around
ahead.
too, right? Like I got
Yeah,
to see what it was like to be a part of that
that's
team,
true.
um,
Yeah,
a little bit as
very,
well.
very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was it at NRDC that in that position that really said, okay, I think this is where I want to be.
I think one, it's like a value system, right? Like how are
Mm,
we approaching the issues that we're working on? Are we doing it in a way that's honest and,
hmm.
true to the science and the information that we have, and also understanding and true to the people that it's going to impact, I think is really
Mm,
important. Often I think there's this sort of capitalistic kind of industry slant or allowances that get made. I think in the NGO world, when you're all applying for funding, there's a little bit of that happens regardless, and you do your best to still advocate for things in the way that you think is important. But at NRDC, I think I found a place where the values were really aligned.
mm.
There's a good understanding of like having some kind of balance and being able to set your personal priorities with your work time too.
Yeah.
And also just brilliant people like to learn from and to hear about their experiences. Like I work with Sarah Chasis, who's been with NRDC for 50 years. This was our 50th
Oh,
anniversary with NRDC. And some of
what?
the like amazing like landmark ocean conservation
Mm-hmm.
laws that have been passed, like she had a hand in over the
Yeah.
years, and just being able to
The
learn from
stories she
people like
must
that.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah. So that definitely brings into light of like why it's important to do that. Even the loyalty to have somebody there for 50 years, like that's really cool to have an organization that wants to keep people there for that long as well. Right.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's pretty cool. And then you're working in MPA networks. You're
Mhm.
working in MPA, um, you know, which is what you were what you were doing at the World Surf League. Um, so this is definitely a field of in its own, within marine
Right.
conservation. There's a lot to it. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do with marine protected areas for the NRDC?
So it's really funny because when you talk about marine protected areas, people just kind of nod along like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Seems easy, right? You're just trying to
Yeah.
protect the ocean."
Yep.
People are on board with that. But I would say marine protected areas and fisheries, which are the two topics that I'm working on right now, are probably the most tumultuous
Mm,
things. Maybe there's a better word than that to describe it, to work on in ocean conservation, because fishermen love to fish and they love
hmm
to be able to do that wherever they would like to. And, when you're out in the ocean every day, you have this kind of sense of understanding about what's going on, even if you have maybe a more myopic view of the things that you're
hmm
working on or the things that you're doing in the ocean. So it's really difficult to advocate for protections when you're going up against the fishing industry, I have to say. But I think fishing was my connection to the ocean, right? So
Right.
it's given me, I think, an ability to understand that perspective, but also understand why I want to protect it and kind of have this different view and value system of why we need to create protected spaces. That was a little bit of a
Yeah.
ramble, but hopefully
No, I,
somewhat
I
clear.
I totally agree. And the one thing I was thinking about while you were saying that is a lot. I've had similar conversations with people when you mentioned like, oh, brain protected areas. That sounds reasonable. That sounds good. Like it must be easy to put those in. And I'm always like, no, no, they're not easy because unlike a lot of other conservation priorities, like on terrestrial land, the terrestrial area is usually where people aren't, or it's like a park already, or it's been like that for hundreds of years. Whereas with marine protected areas and fishing, people have been able to fish pretty much wherever they've wanted for hundreds of years,
Mm-hmm.
and so what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, now you can't fish in here, or you can only do it at certain times, or whatever the restriction. There, it's a more of a restrictive case, and so fishers are like, well, hold on a second. I used to be able to fish wherever I want, and I remember when I was doing marine protected area work for my graduate work, I was working with WWF in Canada, and that was one of my projects was looking at macroinvertebrates. But I remember when they told me that they went to a public meeting with the fishing industry, and they said, okay, this is where we're going to put our network of marine protected areas. And they did all this work, like all this science work, and did like ran it through Mark Sand and all this like networks and everything. And it was just they were choosing, and they had all these workshops and everything, but they never really included the fishers. And they presented to the fishers, and the fishers like, nope, nope. They were looking at like, can't, nope, that's where I fish. Nope, that's a good spot. Nope, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. And it was just like, no, 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 because they were just like, you're just telling us where we can't fish. And they just looked at it from a restrictive background because it's these scientists and government agencies that are telling them you can't do this. Now, with that said, it's easier to relate to fishers when you work with them. I've been on boats with, fishers who are part of fishing unions and stuff, and they're the nicest people in the world. They want to, that when you talk to them and you hear from them and what they want to be able to pass it on to their sons and daughters to be able to do commercial fishing for them. And they want to have the fish and to have, the lobster or whatever invertebrate or whatever species they're fishing for to be able to do that for generations at a time. So they want to protect the areas, but it's just the approach that's taken. Now, here's the thing that I love about your background is you love fishing. and you love marine protected areas. Do you find when you speak to some of the fishers that you are easily able to relate with them on certain issues over maybe someone who doesn't have a background in fisheries?
Yeah, and what's interesting is I think that the prevailing narrative of like how fishermen view protected areas isn't shared by all fishermen. I mean, I'm an example
Mm,
of that, but
yeah.
as I've been more outspoken about my views on protected
Hmm.
areas, I've found folks have reached out to me saying like, "Hey, I agree with you. This makes sense. You know, I think I've seen how great and how how much more healthy this protected area is that I like to snorkel with my kid or whatever." All kinds of stories like that have sort of started to filter up to me, which has been really, I don't know, sort of validating after
Yeah.
dealing with chaos and drama of feeling like you're taking away someone's livelihood, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
But at the end of the day, I mean, the ocean is still open to fishing. We're just
Hmm.
protecting a full habitat. So we're also giving attention to the other critters that live in a
Yeah.
particular area, right? And not just trying to manage for catch limits and size limits of the things that fishermen like to target, right? And going back to climate change, there's a lot of things that are going to become more unpredictable. And
Hmm.
having those protected areas, I truly believe that's the best tool that we have to make sure, create this insurance policy to make sure that species can somewhat adapt to the changes that we're
Yep.
throwing at them through climate change.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure the fishers that you do, have sort of this relationship with are probably concerned about climate change as well. They're probably seeing the changes on the ocean every day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, California, so much of the kelp forests. When I lived on Catalina, my favorite kelp forest to fish off of is completely gone.
Oh, you're
And that was
kidding.
in 10 years. I came
Man.
back and watched it, like saw that it had disappeared. And so many other sites exist like that all up and down the California coast. So that's really hard to ignore. And plus, we've had invasive species of
Hmm.
algae and such take over and kind of change these habitats.
Yep.
There's a really cool program that's actually funded through, I think, the long term monitoring efforts that they have for California's marine protected area networks. And they actually do research with fishermen. So anglers volunteer to go out
Nice.
on the, call them party boats, but they're commercial passenger vessel boats, I think.
Okay.
Trying to
Yeah.
remember what the acronym stands for.
Yeah.
And I went out on one of the trips from San Diego, Oceanside Harbor. I'm going to do another one out of Santa Barbara in a couple
Sounds
weeks.
awesome.
But it
Yeah.
was really cool because you're with these, conservation minded anglers. Some of them maybe just volunteered to go out fishing and
Yep.
support science. But yeah, we do drifts in the marine protected area and outside of the marine protected area. There are controls about like what kinds of gear you use. We're fishing
Hmm.
barbless hooks, so we do minimal damage to the fish and increase
Right.
their chance of survival after we throw them back. But it was really interesting just having those conversations with these anglers who obviously, have a little bit more of a conservation view.
Yeah.
And so many of them are like, we need to be better, right? We need to keep less. I never keep a full limit of any kind of fish when I go out fishing.
Right.
I throw the big stuff back, even if I can keep it, because I want to make sure that they're able to reproduce and create a lot more fish for my kids to catch. And those kinds of conversations were also really validating to have, and I don't know, exciting to know that there are more anglers, fishermen out there that have these conservation values.
And I think these programs are so valuable in that you get to have that hopefulness. I feel that sometimes you may not see it as much because you're dealing with fishers all the time. I mean, you might see it too, but when I talk on the podcast about fishers, I try and make it like they're they're people too. They're trying to earn a living, and they're trying to do the best they can with balancing the earning a living and being ethical for their own right and for their own, ability to pass down that ability to fish to the next generation. But I find a lot of the times fishers can get vilified, just by just saying, oh, well, fishermen are against this, because they're always against something. It feels like when there's a conservation measure and you hear, well, the opposition, the fishermen don't want this to happen because it restricts them and so forth. And I find it vilifies them a lot. And I feel like that's a misrepresentation of what really happens. I mean, I'm sure there are certain fishers who don't like certain aspects of marine protected areas, but like you mentioned, that there are fishermen who want conservation to happen. They want to make sure to that they'll partake in these programs, and I think that's really important to have that, right? For people to realize, who are not necessarily dealing with them on a one-to-one basis or a one-to-many basis, but they hear fishers all the time in a negative connotation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm laughing because it just reminded me the local Surfrider chapter recently invited me to one of their meetings to talk about marine protected areas and the work that I do. And they did an icebreaker question at the beginning of the evening, like, debate, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Right.
And people were very passionate about their responses. And it really got me thinking, I mean, that is policy, right? And that is the work that you do, whatever kind of advocacy you work in, right? It's taking different opinions about the same thing and figuring out the definition. What is this, and how do we make it work for everyone?
Yep. For sure. And to be honest, I see it in
marine protected areas are like any other policy issue. There are fishermen, there are surfers, there are people that live inland and just want to come to a healthy beach that has some fish in it and maybe some dolphins swimming by, right? Like
that aesthetic, of a healthy ecosystem. Yeah, for sure. It's funny when you mention that too, but the sort of the redefining what something is that has been traditionally defined as something. I find the same thing happens in podcasting. People right now are like freaking out because YouTube is coming out with video podcasts and they're calling it podcasting. And people have been podcasting since the beginning of podcasts. They're like, that's not the definition, like rah, 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 like you're not doing it properly. But everybody's like, who cares, man? Like, it's a podcast. They're calling it a podcast. We're going to make it a podcast. And it's become a podcast now. And so now a lot of people have just been like, the definition has changed because people have kind of changed the way the definition is, and because of the way they thought, the way they came as their values and stuff. So it's really interesting how you can have like just the hot dog is a hot dog, a sandwich kind of thing is really interesting to go about it. It's a great icebreaker.
It really is. Yeah. And I realized in the moment as I was speaking, like, this is a perfect example of how complicated my job is, right? Like, what is protected? Yeah. What is conserved?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a different definition if you ask a fisher, if you ask like an environmentalist or an activist, and 100%. That's such a great, smart icebreaker to do. Hopefully people weren't like getting physical after a while with that question.
No, was not a hearing about MPAs. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So getting back to MPAs, it's been almost 10 years or maybe a little bit over 10 years for the California MPA network that's put into place. Is this something like, what's the work that's being done with NRDC on this area? Is it more of a evaluation, adaptive management type of thing, or are you trying to like increase the amount of area that's protected? I know sometimes that happens, or decrease in certain areas, or change the management. What's the type of work that NRDC is doing with in that particular area?
Yeah, so we're going through what's called a decadal management review of the Marine Protected Area Network. Mouthful of acronyms. Also, welcome to policy.
Yes.
So 16% of California state waters are in the Marine Protected Area Network. Now, that's to varying levels of protection. Some you can fish, some you can't, some are fully protected. So we would obviously love to see, NRDC is also working for towards the 30 by 30 initiative, which is calling for 30% of land and water to be protected. So through this sort of decadal review, we'd love to get that number as close to 30 as we possibly can of these meaningful protected areas, so that we're making sure we're protecting biodiversity, we're creating climate resilience, protecting important like blue carbon ecosystems that are protecting coastlines and communities and things like that. So we see this as a really important opportunity to be able to kind of shore up that network and make sure that we're dealing with climate. We're also talking about like mining and building offshore wind and creating all these industries. So let's get ahead of that and also protect ecosystems so that as we, develop other areas of the ocean, we've ensured that we've protected key habitats. California has also identified a couple other pathways to reach the 30% goal because the state has committed to it. So strengthening our national marine sanctuaries that are in state waters are one. Sanctuaries sound like they're super protected and restrictive, but you can actually trawl in a sanctuary. And other forms of industrial fishing are allowed within them. So can we create little pockets along the coast where we're more meaningfully protecting habitat in those sanctuaries? They've also created a pathway called Indigenous Marine Stewardship Areas that they're trying to figure out, which I'm really excited about, and hope that we can find more reasons to partner with some of the local or the coastal tribes along California's coast, and give them better access back to their ancestral waters and lands and practices. Customary
because they did a pretty good job of protecting and maintaining those areas when they had full control over it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then another one is another wonky acronym, which essentially, like if there's a military closure or something like that, something intended for another reason that might confer conservation benefits, that might be another way to reach 30 by 30. So that was a very windy explanation of all the different things that we're tracking that the state has created opportunity around. But I think the decadal review of our marine protected areas is the most exciting one, because we have tons of information. Like, we've done this. How can we be better? How can we make it better? Knowing what other threats are out there and the things that we need to defend against moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. Is there a lot of collaboration with other organizations with NRDC on this project?
Yep, absolutely. I think any ocean conservation issue, we all work in coalition with all the other environmental NGOs out there. Yeah. NRDC is working really closely with Azul, which I believe you had Marseille.
We had on the podcast. Yeah, we had Marseille
recently. And Environment California. And they also collaborate really closely with this student network group called CalPERG. And the students actually at all the UCs, the University of California schools, have chosen MPAs as their like campaign of interest or campaign of the year. I said that wrong, but they're really interested in marine protected areas. So it's been awesome to have so many young people wanting to get involved in this very wonky, complicated process, but advocating for strengthening our MPA network.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you went through a lot of the different sort of initiatives and different sort of projects that you're trying to use to increase that percentage, because I think, I want the audience to know how complex MPAs can be. And even within each of those projects that you mentioned, or each of those avenues that you mentioned, is complicated in itself, and so it requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of thinking. It requires a lot of relationship building and maintaining, and so forth. And it's very difficult to do it as one organization. It's good to have that collaboration going forward. But also, I also find, like, in California, they seem to be ahead of the curve in terms of the support from the state government, I assume, and even just from the area. People tend to be a little bit more environmentally focused within that, whether you're looking at fishers, surfers, scuba divers and spear fishermen and so forth. You get a lot of people, and even the business owners, you get a lot of people who are very, very pro environmental and trying to get looking at new issues that could arise. Like you mentioned, I know windmills are offshore windmills are an issue on the East Coast. And so, preparing properly. I don't know if there are any active projects for wind on the West Coast, but preparing for that. And then also, of course, the coastal areas is huge when you're looking at blue carbon for, along those areas. Those seagrasses and kelp forests, of course, are super important with that. And there's always changes to that environment, which can, like you said, disappear, make one kelp forest disappear in a matter of 10 years, which is very short. And when you're looking at kelp forests, so there's just so many things to go over. How does your office even just like maintain all that? Is there a big group, or how does that work?
Again, we rely on all of our NGO partners too.
Right.
There are 3 to 4 of us that are focused pretty exclusively, focused specifically, I should say, on the California MPAs. We work on a few other topics as well. And then, being able to kind of share capacity with our other key partners across other NGOs that are interested in this topic and see ways to bring their communities and their followers in, or, maybe it's grassroots led, depending on the organization, has been really key to being able to not only track all of these weird, wonky processes and pathways to getting more protected areas,
No doubt.
but also sharing the information and thinking of creative ways to reach new people and get new perspectives and make sure that we have meaningful policy that comes out of it.
It's like so much information that comes out of these things. It's hard to disseminate to get to everybody, right? About all the successes and the challenges up ahead and so forth. It's I guess that's where the communications comes in, and why you do these podcasts and the talks and everything like that. I think it's great. I love it. I think it's wonderful. Now, how, with all this, and we talked a little bit. We haven't had a chance to talk about Ocean Joy. How do you find the time to get back out into the ocean and surf and fish and all that kind of stuff?
You just have to make time. When I moved back to California, I was like, I'm going to live as close to the water as I can reasonably afford to still also feed myself. And I'm lucky to live within walking distance to the ocean. So especially in the summer, it's really nice. Like if it's not cloudy like it is today, I can get down, catch a sunset, make a couple casts and see if I catch something. Find an early morning surf, get in the water when I can on the weekends and explore some of our MPAs and whatever kelp forest I can find.
Yep. I love it.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
It's, I guess, prioritizing the free time that I do have to make sure I enjoy the place that I'm working to protect.
Yes. I love that. I love all of it. Anupa, this has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast and be able to talk about your career path, and to show everybody like it's okay to pivot and not just go down one path and kind of meander and build your career through and these skill sets and go to a very interesting degree school that is not really done a lot. I think more and more now, but not as much before. And I think it's really interesting to be able to share that. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast and being so transparent about everything and just showing your true passion for the ocean in every aspect, and from the joy to the hard work of NPA design and management. I just think it's wonderful. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we'd love to have you back on sometime.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully I can share a positive update sometime in the future about California's MPAs, if I haven't sufficiently bored everyone with the details.
I am sure you're not. You know what? Some of the biggest questions I get is about careers. So following people's careers is a really great thing for this podcast and for the audience members, because we have a lot of early career scientists who are asking these types of questions. And I think this is great. You might get some DMs in your Twitter or Instagram or whatever, but to ask more questions. But I think this has been it's just been great to be able to share your story. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm always happy to help someone trying to figure out their career path. So just, it's
Very
okay
nice.
to change your mind, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Love it. And I'll put your links so people can get in touch with you in the show notes. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anupa, for joining us on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. I'm going to put a bunch of links to Anupa's sort of not only social media, like I promised, but also to some of the things that she's been a part of. We didn't get into it, but her experience at Upwell, maybe next time we have her on, we'll talk about it. There is a video, a clip where she's talking, but you can get the whole panel discussion on ocean joy and the importance of conversation at the Upwell conference. I'll put that link in the show notes. I'll put the link in the show notes. There's also another sort of short, I guess, documentary type on Anupa's experience as a fisher and as a surfer living in California and growing up in Florida. It's a great little piece that is done on her, and you get to know her a little bit more. This has been an amazing time, and it's such an exciting episode for me to be able to do and connect with another ocean advocate, somebody who's doing a lot, not only in her career, but also in her personal life, to just enjoy the ocean and not just take it for granted, just enjoy the beauty, going out for a sunset, living close by to the coastline, because that's what's important to her. That's important to her values. That's how she grew up, and that's how she wants to kind of continue. And to be honest, I can't blame her. So this is a wonderful episode to be able to do. If you have any questions or comments on this episode, you can hit me. You can hit up Anupa, but you can also hit up me on Instagram by DMing me at How to Protect the Ocean. All one word, at How to Protect the Ocean. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about this episode and about the podcast in general and communication in general. And of course, if you want to sign up for the Build Your Career in Marine Science and Conservation program, you can do so by going to speakupforblue.com/career. That's speakupforblue.com/career. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. If you want to share this podcast with somebody, it's free to do so. All you do is just click copy the link on whatever app you're using and send it to that special friend that says, hey, you know what? I think you're going to really enjoy this episode in this career. If you want to become a marine biologist, check out what Anupa has done. It's amazing. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. Talk to you next time, and happy conservation.